Hi everybody. Today we're going to look at graphing quadratics in a lot of different kinds of forms. The best tool that we have is an online tool called Desmos Graphing Calculator, and you guys will want to open up another window and get that Desmos Graphing Calculator going. I have a split screen here where I can enter what I want to in Desmos Graphing Calculator and show you how that works. So first of all, we're going to take our very first equation for number 1, y equals 3x squared, and just type it in. So we'll go y equals 3x squared. Okay, now you can see that we have a graph done for us. It's called a parabola, that U shape that we've been graphing. And we can answer a lot of questions about this by just looking at how it's graphed. For example, this number 1a says, does the graph open up or down? That's talking about the U shape. And this U shape is right side up, so it's opening up. So you just have to write up. Okay. Now, what is the zero of the graph? Lots of times you might have more than one zero, but in this case, the zero happens where the graph crosses the x line. And I am going to just put a dot right there. That is the zero graph. That's the only place where it crosses the x line. And the zero of the graph happens at 0, 0. So there's the answer right there. One of the things that's nice about Desmos is if you'll click on different parts of the graph, it'll tell you what the points are at that point, just like I showed you. So the zero of the graph right here where it crosses that x line is 0, 0. Okay, what is the axis of symmetry? Now the axis of symmetry is that line that splits the graph in exactly half right here. So you can see that the graph is split in equal parts right by this line that's vertical. That's where y equals 0. So that, or where x equals 0, sorry. Where x equals 0, because look, here's 1, here's 2, and so on. But this is where 0 is. Notice that the graph has its vertex at 0, 0. So x does equal 0 here. This first number where x has what it equals is always the axis of symmetry. So if you can remember that, just look up at what the vertex is, and the axis of symmetry is x equals that number right up there. So x equals 0. Now here's the interesting thing. The vertex does happen to be where it crosses the x line. So in this case, the 0 of the graph is the same as the vertex. So the vertex that we just found, 0, 0, is the same as the 0 of the graph. Now, does the graph have a maximum or a minimum is the question that we need to ask right now. Notice that this graph is shaped like a U, and it's shaped right side up. If the graph is shaped like this, it has a valley, and its lowest point is the vertex, like that. That means it has actually a minimum because the vertex is the lowest point. When the graph is a negative graph and it has a U shape that goes upside down, then the vertex will be the highest point of the graph and will be a maximum. But in this case, the graph is the lowest point. You can see that vertex is the lowest point. So you can just write that it's a minimum, or I'm going to write min for short, and you can abbreviate too. Okay, so now let's look at number 2. Number 2 says y equals negative 1/2 x squared. And I just erased my first problem, and I'm ready to put in my second equation. So I'm going to say y equals negative 1/2 x squared. Okay, now just like we were talking about before, when the equation is negative, it does flip that u-shape upside down, and you can see that happening over here in the graph of the parabola. It's upside down. Now let's answer our questions. So does the graph open up or down? Well, we just talked about how it opens down. And what's the zero of the graph? So looking at the x line where y is 0, we can see that it's only crosses it at one point, and again it is right there at the vertex, and it is 0, 0. So the zero of the graph again is 0, 0. It won't always be the same as the vertex. These first two problems are just like that, but that won't always be the case. What is the axis of symmetry? Look at the first number in the vertex, or the zero of the, not the zero of the graph, but in the vertex of the graph. Let's write our vertex down here. Vertex is 0, 0 also. But if you look at the first number in the vertex of the graph, that will tell you what x equals. And in this case, x equals 0. The axis of symmetry is that line that splits the graph exactly in half, straight down the middle. Axis of symmetry. Okay, now does the graph have a minimum or a maximum? Well, that vertex is at the top of the hill, you can see. So it is the max. And we could just write that as, I didn't need that. Forget I wrote that. Just write max. Okay, that's good. All right, let me show you what happens if you don't erase your graph in Desmos. You can start adding extra graphs on top of it. The problem is sometimes it gets a little bit confusing. But we'll just do this to show you what happens. So we'll say the next one, y equals negative x squared plus 2 x plus 1. Okay, you can see it gives you the new graph in a new color. So here's my green graph that would be graphed over my original graph, the blue graph. And you can see, you can kind of tell what's going on, but just so you guys won't be confused, I'm going to erase my first blue graph. Okay, so now we're just looking at number 3's graph and answering some questions. First of all, does it open up or down? And we can see that it opens down. So you can see that it really does open down. And you actually, if you looked at the equation, you could tell without even graphing it that it was going to open down, because you see that negative out in front of the equation. That's going to tell you automatically that that will be an upside down U-shape or an upside down parabola. So that negative means that it's going to open down. Okay, what are the zeros of the graph? Well, here it's a little bit different. It's not happening at 0, 0. Here would be our vertex. There is kind of 0, 0. But right here where the y line, where the y is 0 and it's right on the x line, we have here where the graph crosses the x line, and we have here where the graph crosses the x line. If you click on those dots, then it will give you the zeros. You know they are zeros because the y is 0, and over here the y is 0. Because it crosses the x line twice, it's going to have 2 zeros, and that's often the case with a parabola. So when we write what the zeros are, we'll write them just like it shows you on the graph. It's negative 0.414. comma 0. That's the first one. And the second one is 2.414, comma 0. You might also sometimes see it written as x equals, and then they would give you the number, like x equals 2.414, and also x equals negative 0.414. Those are both ways that they can write the zeros when they say x equals the numbers, or in these ordered pairs like they show you on the graph. For now, it's okay just to write the ordered pairs. That's great. Now, the axis of symmetry is that line where it splits it right in half. You could draw a straight line right down the center of that parabola. Now I'm going to click right here on the vertex for a second. And this will give us our vertex right now. So we can come over here and write our vertex. So it's going to ask us in a minute, what's the graph's vertex? And we will just say that x, well, sorry, we'll write it just like that. We'll say parentheses 1, 2. And that's good enough for our vertex. That's it. Our axis of symmetry, though, is that very first number in the x column, and it's x equals that number. Don't just write 1, because that doesn't mean anything to us. But if you write x equals 1, that's your axis of symmetry. Now, does this graph have a maximum or a minimum? You can see that the vertex is at the top of the mountain, and so that means that's maximum, and you can just write max. Okay, now let's look at number 4. So number 4 says y equals 2x squared minus 16, and I need, it looks like an x in there. That'll make a difference. Plus 33. All right. This brings up some points that we probably want to pay attention to. You can see that these numbers are counting by not ones, because look, 1, 2, 3, 4, and that would be 5. But the number tells us this is 10, so they are really counting by 2s. 2, 4, 6, 8, 10. If you want it to count to ones, you'll need to use your mouse to scroll so that it comes a little bit larger. And then as it goes larger, you will be able to have it count by ones. So you can see that to find that vertex, it went over to 4, 1 right there. And there's our vertex, so we know a few things about that. And then I'll show you how to scroll out too in just a minute. First of all, let's answer our question. Does the vertex, or does the graph open up or down? Well, you can see that it's just opening right side up. What are the zeros of this graph? Okay, this is kind of a trick question. Do you see how, here's the x line, and we told you before that you find the vertex, or you find the zeros by where it crosses the x line. You find the zeros where it crosses the x line. And this graph never crosses the x line. So we could do a lot of involved math that we haven't learned yet, but we'll get to imaginary numbers later in the quarter. But when it doesn't cross the x line, what are the zeros? I want you to write that the zeros are imaginary. And later in the quarter, we'll be able to do better than that. We'll be able to tell exactly what imaginary number that is. But for right now, just know it doesn't cross, so you kind of imagine that it crosses. It's good enough to say it doesn't cross, so it's imaginary. We can find our vertex though, and you can see that your vertex is 4, 1. So let's go ahead and write that our vertex is 4, 1. Notice that I kind of like to find the vertex first before I do the axis of symmetry, because the vertex tells me my axis of symmetry. My vertex first number is 4. That means that for the axis of symmetry, x equals that number, 4. And remember, you have to write x equals 4, not just 4. Does the graph have a maximum or a minimum? Well, it has a kind of a not an upside down, a right side up U shape. And so that vertex is at the bottom of the valley. So it's got a minimum. Positive functions always have minimums. Negative functions always have maximums. Okay, let's look at a different form. This form for number 5 is called intercept form, and it almost doesn't look like a quadratic because you don't have a square there, but you notice that you have two x's. So when you have that negative x parentheses x plus 1 parentheses x minus 3, those two x's would multiply together, remember our box method, and make an x squared. So this is a quadratic just like all the others. So let me get that entered in for you. So negative x plus 1 x minus 3. Okay, now it has graphed it for us. Just like the other forms, if the function has a negative out front, it will be upside down. That's what negative functions look like. So we can say that the graph opens down. What are the zeros of the graph? Again, look at the x-line where y equals 0. You can click on it and it will tell you exactly what those zeros are. Notice that at the zeros, y is 0 in both cases. That's how you know you've done it right. So we can write our zeros as -1, 0, and sorry, having trouble making my comma there. That looks pretty lame, but it's all right. 3, 0. Let's go look at my vertex. Remember, my vertex is either my highest point or my lowest point. Let's click on that highest point, and it's 1, 4. So my vertex is 1, 4. 1, 4. What's my axis of symmetry? Well, remember that that's that first number where the x has a value. X equals whatever that is. So x equals 1 in this case. Does the vertex have a maximum or a minimum? You can see that the vertex is on the top of the mountain, so it is a max. Okay. I think we have gone over enough so that you'll be able to do the last 3 on your own. Good luck. Email me if you have questions.